window angles is quite an issue, so I decided to make a special video about it. And the thing is that many 3D designers sometimes want to render a room from a window angle. And what's the problem with that, you may ask? Well, in that case, the light always gets really flat, and I don't recommend using such angles unless it's really necessary. But if your client asks you to do exactly that, there's something you can do. So here I have a scene, and you see that the image is absolutely flat. Why is that? Well, the main source of light is the window, and there should be no problem with that. However, the camera is set as if the light source is behind us. So the camera is facing away from the window, and since the main lighting is the window, the picture is flat. And so for this scene to have volume, the main light source should come from the side, from an angle of about 90 degrees to the camera. So what do we do in this case? I want to show you how to fix this problem using a light mix. Of course, it's not a perfect way to fix it, but at least it's something. So the first thing we can do is we can decrease the light intensity in the environment box. In this case, our image will have at least a little bit of volume. The next thing is fake lighting needs to be turned off. I'll leave only the rest parameter on for the reflection right here. Still not enough, but in this case I have one more room next to it and it's illuminated with fake lighting. Here it is. So we can increase the value a little bit here so that we don't have over lighting here. You see, now we have some volume on the chairs and some other furniture as well. What's more, in case you have curtains in your scene, you can just close them and reduce the environment amount. And that's what we do in real life. So we can just close the curtains. As for render, well, let's make the background here not so bright and intense. You see now the picture looks better already. And so the last thing we can fix here is the artificial light sources. These are chandeliers, lamps, and so on. And we can make them brighter to increase the volume of our scene. But again, it all depends on the positioning of that light source. If we take this window angle, well, it's just impossible to make it worse. So we can turn on the lamps and chandeliers. And now we'll make them brighter. And I'm gonna set it to a value of 10. If you set it to 20 or 30, you can see with the naked eye that it's too much lighting. So let's turn that down. In this case, we get a kind of mixed lighting, with the environment being darker, not too intense. And now we've got some volume in our scene as well. And we can even go further with that and customize fakes to be more like evening lighting. We can make the next room lighting kind of bluish, more evening looking. We can also make environment light cooler. So we can adjust the glass reflection a little bit as well to add a bit of an evening atmosphere to it. We'll make the light of these lamps warmer because we need to follow the rules of complementary light. We have to compensate for the cold lighting with something, which is a warm lighting. So let's make it a little bit brighter. So you see now we have mixed light, and it seems as if the light from the window is not so bright anymore, and the volume in the scene looks quite decent. Now let's compare before and after. We'll put all of this to 1. See? Here's what we had, and here's what we've got. I think it looks good, and the room doesn't look so flat anymore. Welcome to this additional lighting setup lesson for V-Ray. So here's our scene for today. It's one of our studio projects, and in this video we're gonna see a fast way to set up lighting using fake lights. So what makes this particular scene stand out? Well, it has windows on two adjacent perpendicular walls, and this means the light will be shining frontally into the camera as well as from the side. We'll have to keep that in mind during lighting setup. We're going to do more or less the same things that we did in the previous lessons on lighting setup. So basically it's going to be a recap video. Let's get started. I'll press F10 to open render setup window. As you can see, all settings have default values. The preview has a resolution of 2000 pixels on the long side. We go to V-Ray tab and put a check against MTL override. Then we check refraction, reflection, and opacity, and also self-illumination just in case. Press OK. Then we click No Matte and select V-Ray MTL. Okay, so we're done with basic render setup. Next, we need to make sure that our scene doesn't have lights that might create excessive noise and highlights. So then I'll press 8 on the keyboard to open an Environment and Effects tab. We see that there is no map selected as environment map. Always pay attention to this. Always make sure that your scene doesn't have a light source that could generate highlights. Alright, so we can start interactive render. And then I simply click Start IPR. Outside the window, we have a plane with a background image. So make sure your windows have a glass material assigned to them, because otherwise you'll have to either hide or delete your window glasses so that they don't block out the light. All right, now let's set up some basic lighting. And one more thing, make sure that your background is excluded from override. Our background has a self-illumination material assigned to it. So we currently have self-illumination materials excluded from override. And that's why the background hasn't been affected by the clay material. So it may not always work. Or you may forget to exclude self-illumination materials from override. That's why it's best to exclude the entire background from override. So click exclude button and add our background to exclude list. Let's also add glass just in case. And my advice is that you give them names to be able to easily tell which object is which in your scene. Click OK. Start to set up basic lighting. I lock the camera viewport so that the interactive render doesn't change when we switch between viewports. We go to the Create tab then and select V-Ray. Select V-Ray Light. It's a rectangle. Next we simply go to Settings and enable Targeted option. This will make it easier to direct it inside the interior. And next we do a right mouse click on the light and click Select Light Target. Direct our light to the center of the room. The light is shining frontally into the camera. And also pay attention to this. Your key light should be shining from the side. And it should do so at about 90 degrees to the camera. Otherwise, your image will look flat. That's for sure. And so that's why creating a bright light shining frontally into the camera isn't a good idea. So let's rotate our light by 90 degrees. And now we need to direct it inside the room. We'll switch to another viewport. Direct the light inside the interior at an angle, like this. And next we need to make our light bigger so that it generates a smooth fill light. Otherwise, shadows from objects won't be parallel to each other. And we don't want that. So increase the length of our light. Let's leave the width as it is. The more narrow the light, the sharper the shadows. We can see that the light is too bright. The scene is highlighted, so we just need to decrease the multiplier. Let's make it 5 and see what we've got. Looks pretty good. We can see shadows, and to make them more visible, we can adjust the parameter called directionality. And we can set it to 0.3, for example. And in this case, it's gonna let through more light, and it's gonna make it look rather harsh. So let's bring it back to 0. So say we want to achieve a regular scattered light. We don't want it to be too hard. So we have some highlighted areas on the furniture there. Also, the light is now visible outside, so we can fix that. So first we check invisible to make the light invisible. And then if your scene has glass objects, such as vases, dishware, and so on and so forth, the light may create a strong reflections and specular effects. And so to avoid that, it makes sense to disable effect reflections and effect specular. And if you end up lacking reflections and specular effects, you can turn them back on. Now let's fix these highlights. Let's just go to Layers, to Properties, and there's a parameter called Highlight Burn. You can add exposure layer and set it up right here. Now, as for me, I don't adjust exposure in the camera settings. I adjust it based on what I see in the viewport. That's why we just need to decrease highlight burn to get rid of highlights. Now, I wouldn't recommend going as low as 0, otherwise your image will be too dim, or it may be too dim. Alright, so set up the fill light. Now it shines from the side window. The contrast looks okay. Now let's illuminate this area here. There's light coming from different sides, but some areas of the room are still more lit than others. So let's fix that. I keep Shift pressed and copy the light and put it at 90 degrees to the original light. We direct it through the other window so that it shines frontally into the camera. And pay attention to this. Our background has a semi-cylindrical shape, and it might be blocking the light. So to avoid that, we need to exclude the background from light. Let's exclude the glass as well. I'm going to do it just in case. And now let's direct our light. Add it, press OK. Now, this light should be slightly dimmer than the first one, because otherwise it may interfere with the first one, and it's going to make the shadows look fainter. So we decrease its multiplier to 2, and that'll do, I think. Okay, we've added the fill light, and now we need to adjust its color. The environment light tends to have a cold shade, and we can either set the color directly or change it through temperature. Now let's adjust the temperature, and it's easier and it gives more accurate result. So we change the mode to temperature. The default is 6500 kelvins, and we should increase this value to 8000, and the image has turned warmer. So let's do the same for the other light. 800 will do just fine. And what makes this lighting setup method better than setting up environment light using V-Ray Dome? Well, the main benefit is that it's rendering really fast. Since there's plenty of light getting inside the interior, the noise is going away pretty fast. So now the only thing left to do is to create a sun. Let's disable all other lights to be able to find the best light shadow pattern. So we go to the General tab and then check on box for both of our lights. It's gone dark again. And next we go to the Create tab and click V-Ray Sun. Let's place it at about 90 degrees to the camera. Direct the sun through these windows. V-Ray is asking if we want to add V-Ray sky environment map. No, we don't need that because we're using fake lights. Okay, created the sun, and now we need to direct it inside the interior. Put it at a more or less the same angle as the V-Ray light. And as you can see, the scene is too highlighted, and we need to adjust the brightness. So we go to Modify, and then I decrease intensity multiplier tenfold, 0.1. And that's not enough. The scene is still too brightly lit, so I'm just gonna decrease it further to 0.01. All right, our sun finally has the right brightness. Now let's get rid of this excessive yellowness. So change color mode to override. That's it. We don't need to change anything else. And the sun has a white color. Let's make the sunlight blurrier now. To do that, we increase size multiplier to 16. And voila, we achieved a soft light shining from the window. By changing the size of the sun, we can adjust the sharpness of shadows. And you know what? Let's also raise the size to 32 to make the sunlight even softer. And now let's create the best light shadows pattern. We need to direct the sun inside the interior in such a way that it illuminates the furniture and creates beautiful shadows. There's a fairly big awning over the window. This means that achieving the desired effect can be a bit tricky. So I'm going to lower the sun so that it shines deeper inside the interior and reaches the opposite wall. And now let's try and find the best angle. This looks pretty good, I would say. The scene is rendering fast, as you can see. It's because the sun is currently the only light in the scene, and we can set it up fast and easy. Also know that we have override option enabled, which means we're not distracted by materials. As a result, V-Ray is rendering the scene very fast. Speed is a critical factor when you're doing projects for your clients. All right, so I like this result. We turn our V-Ray light back on. If you find that the sun lacks brightness, you can slightly increase its multiplier. Let's raise it to 0.04. Also, let's make the color of the sun a little bit warmer. All right, that was it. As you can see, this lighting setup method is fast and almost effortless. It only takes a few minutes.